hospital itself had been rebuilt into a modern medical center, with bright lights and automatic doors that hummed softly when they opened. Detective Marla Kessler had retired years earlier. She still lived in the same small house outside the city, keeping the wristband and the old file locked in a drawer. No one had asked about the case in more than a decade. Then one day, a journalist came knocking. His name was Eli March, a freelance reporter for a small magazine that specialized in unsolved disappearances. He had a soft voice and a patient way of listening that made people talk. He'd been researching cold cases involving hospitals, mental institutions, and missing women when he came across a brief mention in a forgotten newspaper. Unidentified woman disappears from St. Augustine Memorial, police baffled. The article was only a paragraph long, printed in 1988, but it was enough. Something about the quietness of the story caught his attention. A woman who vanished in daylight, inside a hospital full of people, and left behind nothing but handwriting. He wanted to know why no one had followed up. Eli drove to the address listed for Detective Kessler. She answered the door slowly, suspicious at first, but when he told her he wasn't there to sensationalize anything, only to understand, she let him in. Her house was small, filled with boxes of old reports and faded photographs. On her desk sat the small box that held the wristband. She opened it carefully and showed him the neat black letters. Anna for 18A. He asked her if she still thought about the case. Every day, she said. You don't forget the ones that don't fit into the file drawers. He asked her if she believed Anna and were the same person. I don't know what I believe, she said softly. But if they were, then she lived in two different times. Eli asked if he could see the hospital's old records, and Kessler warned him. Most of them were gone. But she gave him a copy of the blueprint that showed the sealed vault and told him about the words on the wall. The lights hum when they watch. That was enough to send him digging. A week later, he found a name in a city archive index. Dr. Charles A. Lorne, the director of experimental therapies at St. Augustine from 1971 to 1974. Lorne had died in 1979, but his research papers had been donated to the university's medical library. Eli made an appointment to see them. The boxes were dusty, labeled with numbers, not names. Most held dull medical reports, but Box 14 contained something different. A collection of cassette tapes, each marked with patient numbers. Tape 418A was among them. The librarian warned him not to play them outside the archive, but he could listen in a supervised room. The tape hissed as it started. Then a woman's voice, quiet and trembling. She said, "The lights hum when they watch. I can hear them when I close my eyes. They blink in patterns. I think they're trying to teach me something." Then a man's voice, calm, clinical, said, "And you're safe here. Tell me what the humming says." There was a long pause, and then she whispered, "It says stay awake." Eli stopped the tape and sat perfectly still. The date on the label read March 5th, 1973. 10 days before Harbison disappeared. He listened to the rest. The sessions grew stranger. The woman described dreams where she stood in hallways of light, unable to tell whether she was awake or not. She said the lights were not lights at all, but windows that looked both ways. By the final tape, her voice had changed, slow, detached, almost like someone narrating from outside herself. She said, "If I step through, they'll see me. If I wait, they'll forget I was ever here." The recording ended with the sound of humming, not electrical, more like a tone, deep and low, vibrating through the tape itself. Eli took notes on everything. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that image in his mind, a woman standing in a hallway, staring at a flickering bulb that blinked like an eye. The next morning, he called Kessler and told her what he'd found. She didn't sound surprised. "I knew there was something under those floors," she said. They were experimenting with light therapy and sensory deprivation, but no one ever explained what they were trying to prove. Eli asked if she knew what happened to lab equipment after the flood. She didn't, but she remembered that one of the storage units from the old building had been auctioned off years ago. That lead took him to the edge of town, to a man named Henry Lowell, who had bought surplus hospital furniture in the 1990s. Lowell ran a salvage yard filled with old machines, rusted gurneys, and flickering fluorescent fixtures. When Eli mentioned the hospital, the man laughed softly. "I've still got some of their junk in the back shed," he said. Inside, beneath the tarp, were several metal boxes labeled with fading ink. "Lorne Project, property of St. Augustine." Inside one of them was a small film reel marked Subject 418A. Eli paid cash for it, took it home, and borrowed an old projector from a friend. The film was grainy, silent, black and white. It showed a woman sitting in a chair, eyes covered with a blindfold. A bright light flickered in front of her, pulsing steadily. The electrodes dotted her temples. In one frame, she turned her head slightly toward the camera, as if sensing it. Even through the blur, her expression was unmistakable, calm, distant, resigned. It was the same face from the hospital security photo in 1988. 15 years apart, and not a day older. Eli froze the frame and stared at it. He realized what had been haunting everyone about this story. It wasn't just that a woman vanished twice. It was that time itself seemed to ignore her. He began writing his article, carefully piecing together what he had. The tapes, the file, the missing records, the police notes. But as he worked, strange things began happening. His lights flickered at night. His tape recorder would hum when he wasn't using it. Once, he woke up and found the phrase "the lights hum" scribbled on his notepad in handwriting that wasn't his own. He told himself it was fatigue, a mind too deep in a story. But the feeling didn't leave. A month later, before he could publish, he drove back to St. Augustine to get one last photograph of the new hospital. It was nearly dusk. The parking lot was empty. And there, standing near the entrance, he saw a woman wearing a denim jacket. She stood very still, head tilted toward the lights above the doors. He couldn't see her face clearly, but she looked familiar. He blinked, stepped forward, and she was gone. The next morning, he developed the photo. At first, it showed nothing unusual. But when he brightened the image, a faint silhouette appeared near the door, the shape of a woman, slightly blurred, as if caught between two moments of time. He mailed a copy of that photo to Kessler with a note that said, "She's still walking." That night, he turned off his lamp and lay in the dark. For a long time, he thought he could hear it. The soft, steady hum of the lights above his ceiling, pulsing in slow rhythm like breathing. By 2011, most people had forgotten the name Anna 418A. But for those who followed the story, Detective Marla Kessler, the retired nurse Helen Ward, and journalist Eli March, the mystery still moved like a quiet pulse beneath their lives. Marla was 80 by then, slower but sharp, her walls lined with old case files. Eli had turned his notes into a manuscript that no publisher wanted. Too strange to be true, they told him. He put the pages in a box under his bed and told himself he was done chasing ghosts. And then one afternoon, a call came from the university's anthropology department. A construction crew expanding the basement of the old St. Augustine wing had unearthed a sealed service tunnel, one that didn't appear on any of the blueprints. Inside the tunnel was a rusted cot, several empty oxygen tanks, and a plastic badge with faded letters that still read, an H. The department had called Kessler because her name was still attached to the old disappearance file. She called Eli and said only one sentence. They found her room. The tunnel was narrow, carved through concrete and old tile. You could still smell the damp from years of leaking pipes. At the far end, where a metal grate blocked the second passage, the walls shimmered faintly, the way certain old paints do under flashlight beams. Someone had scrawled words in charcoal on the wall. They think the dark is silence. It isn't. Marla's hand shook as she held the light. Eli stepped closer. The handwriting matched the sample from Anna's notebook. On the cot lay a small portable tape recorder. The plastic had yellowed, but the label was clear. 418A, March 17, 1988, the day before she vanished. The recorder was corroded, but the university's sound lab managed to salvage the audio. It was only 10 minutes long. The tape begins with static, then a faint hum. After a few seconds, a woman's voice, calm, slow. "I remember now. The doctor said the light would help me sleep, but it doesn't make me tired. It makes me forget where I am." There's a pause. The sound of water dripping. Then she speaks again. They say it's 1973, but the nurse says it's 1988. I think they're both right. I can see the lights in both places. Her voice trembles slightly. If you find this, don't turn the lights off. That's when they come. Then, a faint click. The tape ends. Eli listened to it 3 times. Each time, he thought he heard something underneath the voice, a deep mechanical thrum, steady and slow, like the sound of an elevator running somewhere below the building. But when the technicians filtered the audio, the hum wasn't mechanical. It had rhythm. It pulsed at exactly 60 beats per minute, like a human heartbeat. The discovery reignited public interest in the case. News crews came. Documentaries were pitched. But there was still no answer to the central question. Who was she really? Then, almost by accident, the university's DNA lab found a match. It wasn't to any living person, but to a bone sample in a 1975 autopsy file. The remains have been found near Forest Road outside Red Ridge, identified as belonging to an Harbison, age 34, missing since 1973. That record should have closed the circle, but it didn't, because according to every verified hospital record, Anna 418A had been alive 15 years later. There was no mistake in the DNA. The same person had died twice. Eli wrote one last article, not for print, but for himself. He titled it, "The Woman the Light Remembered." In it, he described the recordings, the handwriting, the strange on the tape, and the photo he'd taken at the hospital entrance. He didn't try to explain anything. He only wrote what he'd seen. He delivered a copy of the article to Marla and said goodbye. She thanked him, closed the folder, and said, "We all walk out eventually." That was the last time anyone heard from him. A month later, police were called to a small apartment on the east side of the city. They found Eli's car outside, keys still in the ignition. His computer was on, the screen frozen on a single image, a still frame from his hospital photo. He had zoomed in on the blurred figure by the door. And this time, beneath the glare, you could just make out another detail. A small plastic wristband glinting under the light. The same kind used by patients at St. Augustine. The same letters for 18A. Eli's apartment light was still humming when they found it. Detective Kessler passed away 2 years later. In her will, she left a sealed envelope to be opened only if the hospital's name ever appears in print again. Inside the envelope were 2 things. The original wristband and a note written in her careful, slanted handwriting. It said, "Some people vanish because they are taken. Others vanish because they've learned how to leave. The difference is what they leave behind." She left a hum. Today, the new St. Augustine Memorial stands bright and modern, all glass and steel. Visitors walk its hallways without knowing what lies beneath. The sealed tunnels, the flickering bulbs, the echo of a woman's voice that sometimes seeps faintly through the vents on quiet nights. The maintenance staff have a saying. When the lights flicker, they say, "She's walking again." No one laughs when they say it. Every so often, a nurse on the night shift swears she sees a reflection that shouldn't be there, a woman in a denim jacket, watching through glass, eyes calm, as if listening for something only she can hear. If you stand in those halls long enough, you'll hear it too. That low, steady hum that isn't quite the lights, isn't quite the air conditioning, but something in between, something alive in the silence. And if you listen closely, right before it fades, you can almost make out the words. Stay awake. If this story stayed with you, take a breath before you turn away. Some stories never end. They just wait for someone else to switch the lights back on.